You know, this is actually the first time we've had a minyan of people in this building since Purim a year ago.
Really? Wow.
So it's worth acknowledging. And someone was saying earlier, perhaps we should say Shehechianu. And what's interesting about the Shehechianu is we associate it very much with holidays and with life cycle events. But also we traditionally say Shehechianu when we haven't seen a friend for more than a year, for more than a month, actually, we say a Shehechianu. If we haven't seen a friend in person for more than a year, we actually say Mechayeh HaMetim, which is who brings back the dead, which is a whole nother thing, which we might say too, actually. In fact, we could say that. We could say the two brachot, but I think there's something about the Shehechianu, which is so life-affirming. And here we are just finishing our Yizkor service, which is about recalling the memories of those who've passed on. And of course, in this terrible, terrible year where there's been so much death and illness and destruction and violence and discord, it's beautiful to be able to focus on something that affirms life, which is what Shehechianu does. It says Shehechianu, who has kept us alive, the Higianu, the Shehechianu Kiyamanu, who has sustained us, the Higianu Lazman Hazeh, and has allowed us to reach this moment. So I do feel like us saying a collective Shehechianu in this moment would be very appropriate. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Amen. Maybe we should say Mechayeh HaMetim too. Well, I'm going to acknowledge it feels a little odd, it feels a little different, knowing that I'm looking at real faces out here, but also there's people watching on live stream out there. It's the first, really. So just acknowledging that this 8th day of Pesach, as well as being the day that we associate with this Yizkor that we've just recited together, and the poignancy of memory. The 8th day of Pesach, as I said earlier, is also about a consciousness of messianic times. Mashiach, 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 Mashiach. We think of Mashiach, so many of us, our ideas about Mashiach have been kind of, I don't want to say tainted, but influenced by the kind of Chabad world of Mashiach. When we think of Mashiach, 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 and the idea that the Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, was claimed as Mashiach. And but I think there's also ways in which Chabad have brought incredibly positive ideas to what Mashiach can mean for us. And the idea, as I alluded to earlier, that on the 8th day of Pesach, some people, especially in Chabad, have the tradition of a Mashiach Suda, of a special meal right towards the end of Pesach, where eat some matzah, drink 4 cups of wine, and really imagine what that messianic future might be for us. And I read some of the verses from the Haftorah that talk about the wolf and the lamb lying together, and the symbolism of that kind of peace. But we also know that Mashiach is not just some dude that we're waiting for, right? That's the piece of it that's so hard, this idea that Mashiach is a consciousness. It's not just us sitting around waiting for some savior to come and save us. And how interesting, of course, I cannot ignore the fact that today is also Easter Sunday, and the 8th day of Pesach and Easter Sunday. And Easter, throughout history, has actually been a pretty painful time for Jewish communities, with it being a day that pogroms were incited because of the ways in which Jews were implicated in the killing of Jesus. And the fact that in some ways, and I'm not going to go into that, but if you want to know afterwards, I will tell you, but how that in our own county is kind of alive and well, that kind of theology, that kind of idea that Jews are Christ killers. And yet the messianic consciousness, of course, is about a time of heralding a time of great reconciliation and peace and sisterhood and brotherhood between us all. I haven't read it, but I heard that today there's an op-ed in the Daily Camera with Rabbi Green and someone from the Islamic Center and someone from the Christian community talking together about a response to in the aftermath of the shooting. And we know that so much positive and beautiful interfaith connections that we have within the city and the state of Colorado, but there are just so many ways that the Jewish community and the Muslim community and the Christian community in all of its denominations, as well as non-Christian and Muslim Jewish groups like the Buddhist groups, that we very actively get together to work together on things. And that's part, I think, of the Messianic vision, not that we're all in our separate bubbles, all affirming that we have the truth and nobody else has the truth. So there is no person. And, so much of the rabbinic attempts to work out who is the Mashiach and when's the Mashiach going to come, there's all of these sort of strange calculations in the Talmud that try to really attribute the time. And in the end, when you see that much Talmud, kind of that much ink spilt on trying to understand this, of course, the conclusion you really come to is like, no one knows. No one knows. But it seems clear, and I've quoted before from a book by Rabbi Levine in New York, a book called There Is No Messiah and You Are It, which goes through the whole history of messianism, messianic history. But the ultimate conclusion of the book is based on some of the commentaries of the prophets, is that we each carry a piece of the Mashiach in us. We have to see that. In the counting of the Omer, which some of us started doing after the second Seder, today is the 7th day of the Omer, which completes the first week of the Omer. And those of us who are interested in the way in which the Sfirot of the Kabbalah count it, today is Malchut of Chesed. Malchut of Chesed. What does that mean? It means that the whole of the first week of the counting of Omer is connected to the Sphirah, this special spiritual energy of Chesed. And Chesed is a word that is often translated as loving kindness. Sometimes it's translated as covenantal love. Sometimes it's translated as a faithful kind of love. Sometimes it's translated as compassion. But the whole first week of the Omer is all about the quality, that particular quality of Chesed. And each day has its other quality. So the first day is Chesed of Chesed. The second day is Gevur of Chesed, Tiferet of Chesed, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, and Malchut of Chesed. So we go down the Kabbalistic tree of life with each of the 49 days of the counting of the Omer that lead us to the 50th day, which is Shavuot. Each has a quality and something that is unique to that day that we can work on within ourselves. But Malchut, the last of those 7 Sfirot, is about manifestation. So the idea is, how does Chesed, how does this quality of loving kindness become manifest? And my friend, Rabbi Gabriel Goldfeder, who many of us knew, he was here as rabbi next door that way for some years, who wrote a wonderful book on the accounting of the Omer, which is all about how it's manifest in relationships. The 50th gate, counting of the Omer, the 50th gate. And I love what he says about Malchut of Chesed. He acknowledges that some relationships that we have, whether they're personal, family, intimate, professional, teacher-student, student-teacher, some relationships that we have, inevitably, it's very hard to find Chesed. We all have complicated and difficult relationships. And so the idea of Malchut of Chesed is trying, even in the relationships that we find most difficult and challenging, to find that spark of Chesed, that spark of loving kindness. And so he offers a practice. He says, try to be and do Chesed all day today. Look for ways to be present and involved with the people in your life, not nosy, not interfering, certainly not making people feel uncomfortable, but involved to whatever extent you can manage, while maintaining your integrity and respecting their boundaries. Though not everyone is an Abraham. Abraham is seen as the model of Chesed, always with a tent open with Sarah. We are all his children, and we have it in us to care about each other and to share each other's concerns and joys. To me, these two aspects, Malchut of Chesed and a messianic consciousness, are entirely linked together. As we start to transition into coming together more, as we recognize the impact that this year has had on us, on our mental health, on our social anxieties, perhaps. Some of us are going to find coming back into social life quite complicated. Some of us have spent many, many months being primarily alone. What does it mean to come back into the world? What does it mean to come back into relationship? What does it mean to come back into community in this space or in the other spaces where we find community? And it just seems like such an important and perfect invitation to have the integrity and the impeccability to honor each of the relationships that we have, whatever those relationships are, and especially if they're difficult relationships, and to find that chesed, to find the simple acts of kindness, to find ways in which we can look out for each other and be sensitive to each other. And surely, if we all commit to doing that, that is creating the vessel for a world in which a Mashiach could show up. But we have to do the work, I think. We've seen some awful things this year, not just with COVID, but with the political climate, not just in this country, but globally. Extremes have become more extreme. And there are people who are more firmly in their tribal realities and more firmly against the other than perhaps any time before. We're going to come out of this strange year into a world where there are forces of evil. There really are forces of evil. And we see it. And of course, we're still reeling from the King Super shooting, but we've heard it in so many ways by so many people. We've heard it by our faith leaders. We've heard it by our political leaders. And sometimes it just sounds like just like words that we say, that I say. And I get it. Sometimes it is. It's platitudes. But it's a platitude that I think is really important. That we are obligated, I think, to treat each other kindly, to treat each other with compassion, to get to know each other more, to know what we might need from each other, to know how we can be there for another person. And that's really hard sometimes. And it's really hard after the year we've had because some of us are so caught up in what we might need ourselves that it's hard to look to the other. But I think that's the work that we have to do if we want to fulfill the vision of Isaiah and the other prophets who dream of this messianic future, not to put our hope and our faith into one person who's going to magically come and save us, but that we all do the work. And we recognize again and again and again that beautiful 3 words from Psalm 89, Olam Chesed Yibaneh, that this world is ultimately built on the foundation of Chesed. The foundation of this world is Chesed, is that kind of loving kindness, that quality that we see manifest in Malchut of Chesed in the 7th day of the Omer. And that's the world that we need to build together to bring Mashiach. Oh.